The panel is going to be moderated by the fabulous Basha Rubin with Priori Legal. And then we've got Aaron, and I'm so sorry, Aaron, I'm trying to slaughter last name. Boersma? Boersma. Jason Windmill and Mike Russell. And so I'm going to let them tell you about themselves rather than me try to do it, even though they're all fabulous. But I think they can tell you the most important things that we need to know about them.
I can start. I'm Basha Rubin, CEO and co-founder of Priori. Priori is a global legal marketplace that helps in-house teams find the right outside counsel using talent marketplace and software solutions. I think maybe we can all add our bona fides to be talking about outsourcing, insourcing. I've been doing this in some form since 2013, and in that capacity I've probably talked to thousands of legal departments about how they are making these kinds of strategic decisions.
Awesome. My name's Aaron Boersma. I lead at Ford Motor Company what we call spend innovation. You're probably asking what on earth it's that. It's basically I'm tasked with managing spend across our policy organization, including legal, government affairs, compliance, and things like that. But I also have the privilege of being tasked with creativity. Of how do we get hyper creative and very principled about the way that we manage capital across our policy org. I come from a law firm pricing background originally, and then moved in-house, led law firm pricing at Google, and so there's really not a segment of kind of the global legal marketplace that I have not either bought or sold into, and so it's a really unique perspective of sitting both on buy and sell side of this whole wild road that we have, so yeah.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Mike Russell. I lead the global legal operations function at Expedia Group up in Seattle. We're a team of about 150 spread out all over the place, and my small but mighty army of 3 in the legal ops space tries to keep all the trains running on time. And I look forward to talking a little bit about what I've been doing for, I would say, 10 of the last 25 years that I've been in legal ops. I've been working closely with partners to actually make insourcing and outsourcing choices, considering new and interesting ways of finding and sourcing talent through folks like Priori, and I look forward to chatting a little bit more about that.
I'm Jason Windmill. I'm a partner at Argo Point Consulting. In that capacity, I have advised some of the world's most sophisticated legal departments on their vendor management and outside counsel management strategies and programs. I've been doing it long enough that sometimes that stuff gets picked up in the media, and some of my work has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and NPR and Marketplace. I'm hoping a future project of mine will also be able to be heard in NPR Marketplace, but you know, that's all kind of up in the air given the political climate. So, thank you.
I don't have a clicker. Does anyone have a clicker? I will pardon the technical difficulties. Thank you very much. My role, oh, here we are. We look beautiful, exactly as we do on stage in the right order. My role today is pretty limited. I am going to be running the Q&A, but you are going to be taken through rapid fire history of outsourcing into a lay of the land, what it is, who the players are, and how to set your departments up for success when making these decisions on both a strategic and tactical level. Both Aaron and Mike will be sharing case studies about a successful project. It might be unsuccessful too, I don't know yet. And how they measure impact in their departments in terms of making these decisions. We have prepared a very quick panel discussion and audience Q&A. We're hoping to lead 15 minutes for it, but no promises because this is very substantive stuff. And I guess I just want to kick off before I turn you over to all of these experts by saying the stakes are really high for making insourcing and outsourcing decisions. And in my experience talking to legal departments, they're often not made at a strategic level. They're being made by different practice group leaders in a vacuum. The person thinking about internal hiring is not the person thinking about outside counsel spend. But this is somewhat existential for your legal department. It is how you deliver your core services, what needs to be close to the business, and what can be done either more efficiently or cost effectively externally. What risks are there when you send it externally? And I think the question on everybody's mind is how AI is going to upend the stable state that has maybe emerged between law firms and ALSPs over the last decade, particularly as I think a lot of industry leaders, whether this is brought to bear or not, and we'll talk about this later, predict that AI means that there will be more insourcing over the next decade, and we will spend a little bit of time talking in our discussion about what that means and how you should be thinking about it. So with that, I will turn you over to Jason. We will pass the hot potato clicker.
I'd like to start in by setting the stage and addressing the question, how did we get here? So what's the prologue, what's the stage? Let's introduce some of the players. So first up, we have the enterprises, and that's a very broad term, but under that umbrella, for-profit companies, governments, not-for-profits, et cetera, have operated in an environment of legal complexity for quite some time. And this drives a need for legal advice and support for the business. We couldn't even list all the needs an entity would have, but you have to register. Would you like to hire people? Well, turns out that's regulated. Do you have any real estate? Would you like to buy something? Would you like to sell something? Don't even get me started about litigation, okay? These enterprises, and typically they were the larger ones to start off, recognized the value to having some in-house capabilities resident. And the benefits were cost and quality. You could get better advice and you could get it more cheaply. But as soon as they started that, there was these initial models, in-house models, were small scale, and they were immediately struggling to keep up. There was always more legal work and demand for legal work than resources. Well, why was this? Well, there's many reasons. It's very complicated, and we're not going to get into it here, but legal activity does explode. I'll give you just one data point that's a proxy for things. The Federal Register is 5,000 pages around the time of World War II. The United States government's doing a lot of very complicated things, including a world war. The Federal Register today is close to 100,000 pages, not quite there. It's not a 20% increase. That is a 20 times increase. And let's not even get into, that's a very, very crude measures of that. To support this, we have your friendly local law firms, right? And they're more than happy on an hourly basis to help the struggling companies make sense of it all. And also, you've got great relationships with regulators and policymakers as well. So they are happy to help out. But law firms themselves are undergoing transitions as well. Law firms started off as mostly mid-sized business of limited scale. There was a Boston firm, there might be an Ohio firm, there might be a San Francisco firm. Limited scope, scale, and sophistication. They began to transform into, and this was a multi-decade journey, into professional services juggernauts with enormous capabilities and the ability to project power across wide theaters. I use the analogy of law firms remind me of the old sail-powered yachts. Elegant, interesting, challenging, nothing to sneeze at. Yacht's a very nice thing. Today's modern firms remind me much more of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers with the ability to project force globally. Into that, though, we also had help from the emergence of new players. So if the law firms are kind of boring in the suits, fancy pants, we've got entering on the stage a handsome or attractive renegade with some new approaches and some great capabilities. And those are, to my mind, the alternative legal service providers or legal service providers. The name is somewhat in controversy, but I think we all know what we're talking about there. So that leads to this situation here. And we've got some nice data from, anyone heard of Clock? Well, they do a state of the industry report 2025. This is who's doing the report according to the respondents of this survey. Those respondents may be in this room here. 60% of the work is done in-house, 35% is done by outside counsel, 5% is done by the ALSPs or other legal service providers. All this work is growing year over year. Remember, the Federal Register is just one metric. But probably the one on the right, that looks the smallest, is probably growing at the fastest overall rate. Okay? So that's worth a little bit of consideration. What were people in this survey saying they were using the ALSPs for? That's on the bottom there. Two big buckets emerged. There's obviously a lot of diversity in those service providers, a lot of specialists, there's a lot of things going on. But two big buckets emerged, at least in terms of utilization. The first is support for e-discovery work. That's not surprising. And the second is the new staffing models, outsourced staffing, contract staffing, staff augmentation goes by a lot of names. So if these are the numbers, these are the numbers here, how would a lawyer might look at that and say, oh, that's the legal department. I put on my business school hat, and what I see is maybe the second bullet point here. I see what has been developed is through ad hoc mechanisms. Basha mentioned it's often not a strategy. The result is the accumulation of a lot of individual decisions made independently without concern for the big picture. What I see is a hybrid resourcing model, okay? It's not entirely outsourced, it's not entirely insourced, but there's significant elements of both. And if I were to put my business school hat on, I would say, well, if that's how we're setting it up, and this is a critical function, legal is a critical function to the health of the organization, Business School 101 would say I would want to see a resourcing strategy. I'd want to see an outsourcing framework. I'd want to see formal definitions of what good looks like. I'd want to see processes, mechanisms, tools, metrics to see if we're making any progress towards those formal agreed upon definitions. That's what I would want to see. When I walk into most legal departments, I don't see much of that. What I do see, the typical response was, we got it under control, and the way we got it under control is we have an individual, and this individual has a law degree, and maybe this individual even worked for one of the law firms, and they're going to figure it out. And all those tools and other things we don't really need. That is changing, and that's for the better. Legal ops is part of that change. We are part of that change. I have been part of that change. And legal departments are responding with a whole host of solutions to make things better, to manage the hybrid better. The modern legal department, as I call it. The metaphor that was in Great Currency, it's not mine, it's a bit dated, but I will share it because it was prevalent at the earlier part of my career, was that in-house legal department was like a great school nurse, was great with triage, but when things got really serious, you called in the doctor, okay? The school nurse was in-house counsel. Modern legal departments, and GE gets a lot of credit for this, but others like Pfizer did it as well, said that doesn't work for us. We need doctors and really good doctors, and we're going to go and poach and figure out how to do that. It takes one to manage one. Other things, increasingly sophisticated work segmentation. Let's make sure we aren't using the brain surgeon firm for work that could be better done by an ALSP. And then there's policies, processes, mechanisms. I'm not going to go into that. And the legal departments are really trying, but the problem is the costs continue to grow faster than, on a percentage basis, than the sales and profits of the company. If you'd like to be popular with your CEO, that's a great way to be popular with your CEO. It's just not going to be the kind of popularity that you want. So where does this leave us? Well, like any great long-term relationship or romance, the legal departments, the law firms, and with help and support from the ALSAPs, are driving each other crazy. There's annual bill reviews, there's issues with service and quality, but fundamentally, these parties recognize that even if they drive each other crazy, they need each other. And that's not changing anytime soon. And in fact, legal can be very inward-looking, but this union, such as it is not operating in a vacuum, and it's colliding with big trends like economics. The legal sphere for a long time would say, my legal work is immune to the laws of economics or management because of insert lawyerly argument here. That is going away. And I would say business management is also the one thing that has also had a major impact. We're talking about outsourcing today. This is a good working definition of outsourcing, according to me. It's using external providers for business processes you might have otherwise done internally. And Peter Drucker, the man who helped invent the modern discipline of management, said it better than almost anyone. Do what you do best and outsource the rest. This is a very, very powerful idea. It's correct for careers. Don't try to be your own dentist. It's correct for nations. Conceptually, it has underpinned American economic and trade strategy for the better part of a century. We'll see what happens in the future. And it's also a very good idea for companies and for legal departments. So with that, I'd like to turn it over. It's the bit of a backward-looking exposition into this topic. I'd like to turn this over to my colleagues and hear what they are currently doing and what they hope to do as well with this very important topic. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason. When I prepared the slide, I did not know he would be retiring. But it's still a great quote. You know, Warren knows everything there is to know about value. So how do you get value? How do you find the value in your outsourcing? First thing to do is you need a strategy. You need to understand how to determine what's the low risk, low complexity work, and if you've never done it before, you're going to have to convince your department that this is actually a worthwhile adventure that you want to be on. So find a winner, find a use case. One of my favorite ones would be counterparty NDAs. You know, something simple. Nobody in-house wants to look at counterparty NDAs all day. It's not interesting. It's not career building kind of work. And law firms would love to do that because they can cycle through it and bill you $300 or $400 an hour for it. But you can call up your friendly legal service provider, your friendly legal talent network. You can find somebody who's probably been in-house in a law firm for half of what the law firm rate would actually be, and they'll be happy to look at those NDAs all day long. They might even apply some technology, and maybe these days some AI-based technology. So then you just need those, you know, last couple eyes on the fractional eyeballs on it before it goes out the door, and they can crank through those things like nobody's business. So if you're like us, we do thousands of NDAs in a year. Most of the time people will click through and accept our paper, but not always. And when they don't, we just automatically route that to a queue and know that they're going to be handled. And nobody in-house has touched a counterparty NDA for the better part of 3 years we've been doing that. It just isn't work that makes sense to keep within the law department. Once you've got a slam dunk like that and people are like, oh, okay, so we're saving money on that, we're getting through it. Cycle time is important on those because it could be holding up a sales deal or a buy deal, something like that. So then you want to move on to something else. Intellectual property. Maybe you're in a company that has lots of inventions, invention disclosure forms. I've got people that think they want to patent something and aren't sure where to go with it. Well, my in-house intellectual property people are busy protecting our intellectual property. They don't always have time to do all this research. So again, you can liaise. There are certain ALSPs out there that actually specialize in IP research, and we'll be happy to do it. I just saw a demo recently of some AI tools that can actually do very well with that. So you might think about setting up a small center of excellence within the legal ops framework, perhaps, to support that, or again, liaise with the legal service provider to do it. And if you really truly need an outside counsel level person, then go to the fractional talent network for, again, probably half what you might pay the law firm. Save that highly complex, highly interesting work for your in-house people and let them build up their careers on it. So, but definitely find that winning use case, find a story, get a couple practice groups leaders excited and talking to each other about it. They'll go to the leadership team. They'll be telling the deputy GCs and people at that level that, oh wow, we had this great success. I want to try that too. Do they have people in London? I need somebody in France. I need somebody in Singapore. And so many of these great partners that we have out there now have global resources. I'm constantly impressed by the scope, the scale, the quality of the talent, the diversity of the talent all over the world. And again, the fantastic rates we can find. These people, I've got in-house people that will say, I'm almost embarrassed to give them this low level of work. They're only too happy to take it because they've made a lifestyle choice. They want to work for a couple of clients for 20 hours a week. I only need them for 10 hours a week, 3 times a month. So they can go off and do other work for other people. So that works extremely, extremely well. They can also be branded a couple of different ways. You can have them represent your own law firm. They could operate on your systems, your platform, have a company email and basically be in-house counsel. Or if you want that insulating wall of the outside counsel, they can serve in that capacity as well because they each are their own firm, if you will, and represent themselves under their own name. Are they going to go to court for you or anything like that? Probably not. You're going to use your actual outside counsel panel firms for that, local and regional counsel where appropriate, but you can very much use these folks to do all that legwork, the groundwork. We do a lot of translation type work where we just need somebody that understands the local jurisdiction, the language, the customs, the way the law works in that part of the world, and they can just do all that stuff for you and then turn it over to local counsel when it's actually ready for some action. But strongly believe in putting together a framework. You know, to Jason's point, you've got to be able to track and report on all these things. So how much work are we getting? What's the volume of that work, the frequency of the work? What are we paying for it? What rates are we seeing? Because we still do benchmarking, just like we do with the law firms. We're benchmarking across this pool of talent, regardless of how and when we get it. And then you need to meet at least, I would say, quarterly, depending on the volume, maybe monthly, but quarterly with all of your provider partners and figure out how are things working? Are things working well? People are performing well? Basha said sometimes there might be a failure. I've had one time in 10 years where the person just wasn't a great fit. You know, not that they weren't a good lawyer, just wasn't a great fit for the team. And we quickly swooped in and found an alternative in less than a week. So when that kind of stuff happens, that's when you can really lean on your partners, and they're equally invested in keeping us happy as a client. And they want everybody to be happy and to have that productive relationship. But it has to be run like a project. So definitely take the time to scope it out, have a statement of work, understand how you're managing it, tracking it, assuming you have some type of ELM or similar technology, put the technology to use. I find that you can do a lot of knowledge management type work because as these people produce work on your behalf, you can save that, you can search it, you can throw it in the magic AI box and recycle those answers and use that work product for future use as well. So,
Perfect.
Over to you.
Awesome. So I've got a couple of slides here. And I think with insourcing and outsourcing, we really have to start before we think about, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? We need to acknowledge the landscape that we're kind of entering into when we're starting to make these decisions. And I think really thinking through sort of the history of what insourcing and outsourcing has looked like over time says a lot, right? It used to be this binary choice of like, well, you going to your outside law firm or are you giving it to in-house counsel, right? Now, ALSPs, when you're outsourcing something, you should constantly be asking the question, can an ALSP provide the services that I need in a way that we need it that may be better than our traditional outside counsel? Internally, you're all familiar with this, being ops folks, right? It's when you are working hand in hand with your lawyers, like you can do so many different tasks than you used to be able to. And you'll notice that when I talk about future, 2025 genuinely is sort of a banner year for what the insourcing and outsourcing conversation should look like. Because the combination of lawyers, technology, and process are going to give you an extraordinary amount of possibilities and capabilities on an ongoing basis. And we are still trying to explore, what does that even mean? And when you talk about outsourcing, you'll notice, I think over the next few years, and this is candidly a prediction, that your external counsel, your alternative legal service providers, your managed service providers will start to get much more specialized and really be AI driven, right? I think of it in sort of two ways. I'll give a shout out to Darth Vaughn on this one, is we want our lawyers focused on what lawyers do really well, even externally, which is advising us, counseling us. right? We don't want folks to just draft all the time, right? Those aren't the tasks that are adding as much value as that true sort of advisory counseling. And that's the way that we inherently think about outside counsel today. That's why we call them outside counsel and not law firms. We believe that counseling is their value proposition, right? So this is just the landscape here, but I want to acknowledge on the next slide a little bit of a place that we all have to navigate as we're making insourcing and outsourcing decisions. So if you're going to insource somebody or hire a new headcount, or if you're going to go externally, can anybody tell me what you need to do that? Anybody? What was that? Money, yes, yes, right? Money. And so as you're talking about this insourcing and outsourcing idea, you also need to better understand how your finance teams are looking at this question, right? How many of you have said, well, outside counsel costs us $500 an hour, and if we hired somebody internally, it'd be half the cost. Like, this is obvious, right? You really need to understand, how does your finance team start to think about this sort of insourcing and outsourcing debate? And so first, you need to know that increased headcount at a macro level, right? I'm not talking about Ford, I'm not talking about anywhere else. Very principled, finance director is gonna say, if we hire a lot of people, that's gonna be a drag on earnings, right? And why is that? Is because that represents a long-term commitment of cash. Like, we don't hire somebody to going, let's fire them in 6 months. No, we don't do that at all. We want these to be long-term partnerships that you have within your own organization, right? What that means is bringing on new headcount requires a very high bar, and it should. If you're gonna invest in somebody for 5 years, we can't just make those decisions overnight, and your finance team doesn't want you to make those decisions overnight. Ultimately, what this means, and I think this is the most important piece here, is that finance just doesn't get it, is not a viable operating model for your team, right? All that will do is create friction between you and your finance partners. That's not what you want, because if you're adding value, legal is the center of where commercial activity is constantly happening. You need to be good partners with them. Now, on the outsourcing piece, how does finance typically think about this? They know these generally represent shorter term capital commitments, right? It's not that we don't work for our law firms over a long period of time, but having a 12-month project versus bringing on a new team that will be there for hopefully decades and decades, right? Very different. And they also recognize that outsourced options sometimes can be more expensive. Like, that's not lost on finance. Sometimes it can be cheaper, sometimes more expensive. But what that means is how you outsource really, really matters. And you have to confidently say, we are investing well. Ultimately, what is your general counsel gonna want to say to the CEO and the CFO? You gave us X amount of cash and we maximized it. We invested it in ways that moved the company forward. That is a major, major task, but it's important for ops teams to lean in and take the lead on that piece. Because ultimately what that means is that stewardship here, that's not an end goal anymore. That is your baseline operating model, right? If you cannot confidently say across your portfolio, we are being very good stewards of the company's money, if you can't say that directly to your finance team in earnest, that's the new table stake. That's the place that you sort of have to get to. But you also have to recognize, like I showed on the previous slide, everything is dynamic at this point in time, right? We are an hour away from a new piece of technology dropping that could fundamentally shape how the practice of law functions, which means that as we're talking about insourcing and outsourcing, we have to really lean into those pieces. So,
amazing. Okay. You guys, Aaron and Mike are each going to do a 90-second case study about an outsourcing project that they have done and how they knew it was a success, how they measured it and what the impact was, and then we are going to do a rapid fire Q&A. Mike, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Somebody keep me honest on time. This, think of a 100-year-old manufacturing company that has made products, has product liability cases. Some of you may have experienced discovery in warehouses and things like that. I was faced with millions of documents in physical boxes in warehouses in at least 12 different places around the US where there were no legal folks. These are just manufacturing facilities. And we had to figure out what was relevant to these product liability cases, get it scanned, get it into a database, and make it available for review and production. And we had about 6 months to do it. So, of course, our National Coordinating Council, National Discovery Council, they all stepped up and said, we can do that, here's a proposal. And there were too many zeros in that proposal for us to consider it. It just wasn't going to work. And by the way, they didn't have the manpower, the boots on the ground to really do it in the time frame we wanted. So they were kind of hedging the bet that we could do it in 7 to 9 months maybe. But anyway, so I called up one of my friendly legal service providers, a couple of them, because I wanted a couple of bids. Folks we had existing relationships with, had done other work for us. We created a network using their outsourced fractional talent and their in-house people. One of these LSPs happens to actually have a licensed practicing law firm arm in Arizona, of course. And so they were able to stand up behind the work, and we didn't need National Discovery Council to do it because we didn't think anybody was going to challenge it. It probably was never going to go to court, but if it did, we needed that insulating buffer, and so we didn't want to pay the law firm to do it. So through the combination of the LSP and their outsourced and fractional talent and their law firm arm together, we created this virtual army that went out, went through all the boxes, loaded up trucks, got the stuff scanned, and we dumped it into Relativity, and the rest is history. But we got it done on time, and it was much cheaper.
Yeah. For us, a really great example, and this just shows sort of the shifting nature of this ecosystem of insourcing versus outsourcing, is we had a particular opportunity that came up where a client of ours, so business unit, basically says, we need kind of very particular advice, and we really only had one lawyer in-house doing this kind of work. And he's like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Like, I probably need to go get so-and-so from the law firm, and he's gonna need to help me like virtually full-time to get through like from point A to point B over extended period of time. And so we just started asking some questions of, well, tell me what you need about this, like what's the specific expertise that you're looking for, and also what's really important for your frontline clients, right? In the same way that a law firm is going to say, what's important to your client? Asking the same thing. What's really important is like speed of turnaround, making sure that we're getting advice to that business unit faster. And just by asking those questions, we realized that a flex talent opportunity was actually a much, much better option because those folks are embedded within the organization. And so we actually don't even think of it necessarily as like insourcing versus outsourcing, but right sourcing. Because if speed to getting advice to your teams is paramount, having somebody embedded, critically important that a typical outside counsel can't match. And so just through that, a meaningful cost save by what we would have ultimately done, but we've put resources in place that are gonna push our business at a faster speed than others, and we actually think that that's the bigger win that we try to focus on, is we're enabling us to just move at a much quicker pace.
You both were exactly on time. Perfect.
Wow.
Okay, let me, quick audience poll. There were two directions we were going to go with the Q&A. I think we only have time for one. One is the impact of AI on insourcing and outsourcing and how you should be thinking about that strategically. And the other is how to craft an overall strategic plan across your department about what work to insource, what work to outsource, and across your law firms, your ALSPs, et cetera. Who wants to hear about AI? Okay. Who wants to hear about how to craft a strategic plan? Well, we have a clear winner. Aaron, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of crafting a plan, if you don't have one already, you need to focus on frameworks as opposed to an if this, then that, because that's going to look completely different. And I'm not even just talking about like specific legal work, but even how you're thinking about technology to support things like e-billing. The reality is that you can, within an hour, get to a proof of concept on a piece of software that, with a little bit of internal support, is a fully functioning application that can save hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours per year. You used to never be able to do that internally. You're like, okay, where do I find a software team? In a year from now, we'll have this. That doesn't exist anymore. And so trying to think through what is it, how do I have frameworks that will sort of fit around my organization and what they're going to need the most? It's going to look different for Ford as it is for any other organization. But again, you need guiding principles as opposed to just a if this, then that type of approach.
Yeah, and I think you can hopefully latch on to your corporate culture. So you may have a procurement leader, you may have a CFO, you may have just a general culture of outsourcing. You know, they've been doing this kind of work forever in IT and depending on your industry. If you can latch on to an existing framework, to Aaron's point, then you may already have a playbook and something that can work. So definitely make friends. I know we're kind of frenemies sometimes with procurement, but make friends with your procurement people and find out what do you do for your contingent labor and other things that the company's already doing, IT resources and so forth, and how can I turn that into something that will work for legal. At the same time, if you don't have that culture, you don't have that history, then I go back to my earlier point of find a winner, find a champion, somebody that's willing to buy in with you, probably a DGC, a practice group leader, somebody like that, who's just willing to give it a try for something that's low risk, low complexity, and you're saying, hey, let's create this thing, I'll manage it like a project, it's going to sit in legal ops, and we'll go back to the GC at the end of the day and say, this is how we manage this work. And this person internally is now freed up, or we don't have to hire somebody, or they're doing more interesting work, revenue enabling work and business supporting work as a result of this. Now let's try to roll that out to the rest of the department. That was my story coming into Expedia, where we had never considered outsourcing anything in the legal department, ever. So I had to start slow and roll from there. But other companies, like I say, make friends with procurement and finance and give that a try.
Aaron hit upon the value of a framework for strategy. I think that's something I wholeheartedly agree with. And Mike, I liked your point about if you can hang what you're doing on some broader corporate initiatives and resources, you're going to be more successful. So a real life example from my archives, a big pharmaceutical company needed to optimize some of the vendor management at their global legal department. The CEO had an initiative that the company was too complicated and things needed to be simplified. He wanted to look at things that were simple. It's not a bad idea. Legal department reflected on that and said, I don't know, we've got like 8 discovery providers, we've got 8 medical records collectors, we've got 5 deposition companies, we've got this. And if you ask the people, the lawyers that hired those service providers, they would insist that only that service provider could do the work. No one else could do it. It would be a disaster, be awful. So the strategy was set actually by the general counsel, and he said, all right, for all this stuff that's not a law firm, you get, he said this to his team, you get to have one. You get to have one. One discovery provider, one records collector, one deposition, and there can be one backup. I'm not an unreasonable individual. Something doesn't work, but you're going to come to me at the end of 6-9 months, and that's going to be our resourcing and sourcing strategy and framework. Of course, pandemonium breaks out in the legal department, the whole thing is going to collapse. 3-4 years later, they have very well-managed sourcing strategies, programs. Nobody's gone to jail. They've saved tons of money. I think each category saved about 25%. The quality is better. But that didn't come from bottoms up. It really did come from, as I think we heard, there was some corporate vision. Legal figured out what that meant, and then that created a framework and a strategy. And it was good, and actually it was helpful. Some of the lawyers kind of pushed back on it, and the leadership of the legal department said, look, this is what the CEO wants. We can't have 59 random vendors anymore. We can have 12.
Yeah, I think I would just close with 3 minutes left by saying that I think the framework is important, but the philosophy coming from the top is also very important. So you saw on one of Jason's slides at the beginning that the average breakdown of a legal department is about 65-35 in terms of insourced work versus outsourced work. But there are companies that run the full gamut. I have talked to companies that only outsource about 15% of their work overall, and I have talked to companies that outsource more than 50% of their work. And the companies that are outliers tend to have a real philosophy that comes from the top, which is either that we think we can build more efficiently internally, which I think is where the AI piece is going to start to come in, as a lot of work that historically was sent out can be done more efficiently, which Aaron was alluding to as well. And also that you can maybe give your internal lawyers more interesting projects to work on if you're keeping some of your litigation internal as opposed to sending all of it out. On the other hand, there is the do what you do best and outsource the rest, and an idea that you want to keep a core lean legal team internally that is very close to the business, and then be able to flex up and flex down with a range of outside counsel, law firm, alternative providers. And I think that that decision needs to come from the top, and then everybody needs to be aligned across the organization in how to do it. And then all work needs to be evaluated along a right sourcing framework about risk and complexity and where that best lives. And that pulling that all together creates a coherent and intentional strategy that allows you to achieve your financial and your outcome-based goals. So I am sorry that we didn't have time for audience questions, but we will all stick around for the next couple minutes. And thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your session.